Hello everyone, Sarah Jane Critchley here, author of A Different Joy, The Parent's Guide to Living Better with Autism, Dyslexia, ADHD and more. Now today I wanted to talk to you about diagnosis. I've heard it said by some people, usually professionals rather than parents, that parents will go and seek a diagnosis of something like autism or ADHD because it explains the behaviour of their child and because they want to get extra services and they're sharp-elbowed middle-class people and that way they get better resources. Well, I have to say I think that's a whole load of bunkum from where I'm sitting. The diagnostic process is incredibly complex, it's difficult, it's lengthy, and it's emotionally quite difficult to cope with. I remember very clearly when we first were looking for a reason why one of our children was experiencing quite profound difficulties. In spite of being very capable in some areas, they were really struggling in others. And so we sought for some specific help and guidance to work out why that might be the case. And when we got an initial diagnosis, in this case it was ADHD, it was an absolute, like a landmine going off in our family. It was just so distressing that this amazing, sparky, fascinating, wonderful person who we know and love could never do some of the things that we expected them to be able to do, and that they were going to struggle, and that the possible outlook for them was going to be frankly quite grim in comparison to their peers. And that's incredibly difficult to kind of cope with as a huge grieving process, and it's not something I think that a parent would seek lightly. And possibly some people might not have thought about that in advance, but the reality is that it's a difficult, complicated, complex process that takes a very long time and requires quite a lot of dedication in order to get through it intact. Clearly. So I don't think that's the case, firstly. Secondly, that process for us was so traumatic that we did not seek any further help from statutory services because it was just too painful to go anywhere near them, so we did everything ourselves, and I really regret that now. I massively regret that now. And then when we had issues with our other child, it was only when things became incredibly difficult for them that we then sought the help of statutory services and in fact got a diagnosis very quickly. Our initial diagnostic interview was quite amusing because we walked in and my husband, who is an absolute delight, turned around and said, "Can't possibly be doing all those things. I do all those things." I went, yes, you do, dear. And so why did they have to have a label? Well, that's a very good point. Why do they have to have a label? And the answer for me was because without the label they couldn't get the support that they needed. And so we have a diagnosis of autism for both children, eventually. And so without the diagnosis, we would not have been able to get the specific help and support that we have received. So I think that's quite crucial. I have had to think long and hard recently about why you might go for a diagnosis and the importance of that for girls with autism. And the outcome for unsupported girls is actually much, much worse than it is for boys with autism who are supported and identified. And often these girls will turn up in adult services with mental health issues, and they will really have a very, very rough time as a result of being unsupported. And they have to be far more affected, far more severely affected, to be able to get any form of support. So if they demonstrated the same level of function as a boy, where a boy would be supported, often the girl will not. So there are issues, layers and layers and layers of problem. And I think in our case, leaving it made it worse, has made it much, much worse. So if you have somebody who has a very active presentation of their difficulties and they are an issue for educational services, then it's much easier to get support because you have to have their scenario taken care of so that they can learn, so other people aren't disadvantaged within their class, etc., etc. But if you have somebody who's issues are internalised in terms of their ability to cope, in terms of their mental health, in terms of their physical health, which is often when mental health needs are undealt with, I believe that physical issues can then happen as a result, then it makes it so much more difficult, and then harder to unpack, because your body then learns a way of reacting to things. If we had known earlier that my daughter was on the spectrum, we would have put in place different help for her. We kind of thought that we're an autism-friendly family, so we wouldn't need to do that, but actually in reality we really did. And we should have responded appropriately, or more appropriately, to the level of difficulty that she experienced. And I think if I had my time over again, I would have reacted much faster, and I would have listened more actively through that period. And it's hard, because if you have somebody who doesn't understand what's happening in their own body, who doesn't recognise what a panic attack feels like, who thinks that actually everyone wants to go to the toilet to be sick when they're having a lesson, who would walk around the school repeatedly to avoid talking to people with earphones in, because that's a perfectly reasonable way of getting out of a difficult situation. If I'd really thought that through, I think I would have done things differently. I think I would have put in place more social support. I think I would have sought more support from the school. I think I would have far earlier sought support for sensory issues, because those, time and time again, those are a barrier and a problem. So that's what I would have done. That's why I would bother, because I think it makes a huge difference to young people. And I think if I had understood earlier that some behaviours that I was seeing were a key feature of autism, or how they worked, because it's taken me years to build up the knowledge that I have now, then I would have reacted slightly differently to situations. And you know, we all get things wrong every day. That's normal. So there will be days where I'll say, for heaven's sake, just get up and get on with it. I don't care whether you've got a migraine. I don't care whether you're oversensitive. I don't care whether all of those things that you're suffering with are prevalent. Today, I just want you to get up. But actually, that's not terribly helpful. And just telling somebody to get up when they're feeling really sick. If I had flu and somebody told me just to get up and get out of bed, I wouldn't want to do it. I probably wouldn't be able to do it. And yet the frustration of living with that level of difficulty again and again and again and again and again makes you react as a parent in a way that isn't always optimal. So, you know, we all get things wrong. We all screw up. We all do things we wish we hadn't done. And no one's perfect. So, hands up, not perfect, but a diagnosis is helpful. And then just asking the question again and again. Why is it that you do? How do you feel when? Can you tell me what your body's doing? Those sort of questions I think are quite helpful in terms of helping people work out what's going on. So yes, I would get a diagnosis. Do I think it's a bad thing to label people? No. No, the reason why I don't think that is because, frankly, looking at most of the young people that I see who need the level of support that we're talking about, they already look different. They already look odd. They're already singled out by other children in their classes. Other children who don't even know them will come along and interfere and push them into rows and trip them up and just knock bags off their shoulder. And that's, frankly, part of their normal everyday experience for many of them. So they need extra support, and without diagnosis you can't get that. So I don't know if you agree. If you don't agree, your views are of course completely up to you. I'd love to know what you think, and I'd love to know if there are any other subjects you'd like me to talk about. You can have the benefit of my wisdom and experience, and you can learn from the mistakes I've made, and believe me, I make lots of them on a daily basis, so trust me, no one's ever perfect. Anyway, lovely to speak to you, and I hope to see you soon.